Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by, and this is part 3 of the selected chosen few, and in this video I'm including the Cattleya Types and the Tolumnias. Okay, so that they bear no relationship with each other. They just don't naturally fit into any of the other sections that I'm dividing the plants up into. So this time round it's Cattleya Types and Tolumnias. Right, this one is Brassavola Little Stars, which is nodosa, I think, crossed with something. But the reason this one's been chosen is it's a relatively newly acquired plant and newly mounted, so it can remain here undisturbed now. I mean, over a longer period of time, the fact that the moss was placed over the top of the roots, it can always be teased off and replaced by some new, but without the plant having to come off the mount. So this is a nice static plant to look at. It didn't have the best root system when I've got it. One of the new growths got damaged in transit, had to be taken off. And another one that I thought was going to be okay was actually kinked and it started to rot back, so that was taken off. But underneath where that new growth would have been are new roots. So it's still going to add to its root system despite that shoot being lost. And the chances are it will still produce another shoot from this area. Now, this plant's effectively got several leads. There's one here. There's one back here, and I've just noticed a new growth starting in there where my thumb is. Dirty thumbnail, marvellous. So we've got our first new growth on the plant since I got it. There's quite a few new roots in various places. There's another lead up the back here that I'm expecting to shoot out in the not too distant future. And what we have got on this one is some spikes coming. Not a lot, and they're relatively new. But there's one up the back here pushing on quite nicely, again where my thumb is, and we've got another one here at the front pushing on. I think there's a couple of others, but we can say there's at least 2 spikes pushing on. Oh, there's another one tucked in there as well, so 3 at least. So some blooms to come down the line. Stand up, will you? Thank you. So that's the first one, and as I say, the progress on this one is watching out for new growths in various places. Obviously one's already started, and seeing how the spikes develop and what the blooms actually look like. For me, it will be first time blooming when it does eventually get there. So Brassavola Little Stars. Right, this one's been chosen for quite a few reasons. It's got a name about 8 foot long. It's Shinfong Little Sun Young Min Golden Boy. It's a bifoliate, and as a consequence I've found over the years that when you repot a bifoliate, if you don't get that timing absolutely spot on, it will dump a lot of its old roots. Far more dramatically than the single-leaved Cattleya types. They just seem to be prone to dropping old roots. But this one was potted at a reasonable time, so although it's lost quite a few of its older roots, it has produced some new ones from the areas it's now growing in. And part of the reason for choosing this is it's doing some strange things, so it'd be nice to see why and what it's up to. So reasonable new growth here. It's been a reliable bloomer. Looking at the top of the plant, you can see virtually every mature bulb on there has bloomed. So it's obviously a reliable bloomer. This nice growth, 2 good leaves and a sheath. There's no bumpy bits in that sheath yet. Yes, there is. So it looks like that is going to bloom. But round the other side of the plant, to my surprise, out of basically the back end of the plant, it produced these 2 tiny little growths. They are half size and single-leaved. Both have a sheath. I don't expect them to bloom, but who knows? Cattleyas can do some strange things. So the only good thing about these 2 very weak growths is that they have provided some leads. So in theory, if those now produce new growths, they could push on to be full size. So that's the state of play with this one. Obviously the latest growth on here that's liable to bloom is the one we'll watch, but effectively with 3 new growths, obviously we'll be watching for where the next set of new growths come out and how well they grow on and what sort of root system they produce. As I say, this has got what I would call a weaker root system. It's not brilliant, but it's enough to hold the plant in there, you know, and keep it in a survival mode without it getting weaker and falling apart. But those 2 weak new growths around the back were produced before this part of the plant produced some new roots. So yes, we'll keep our eye on that one. Should be good blooms too if it does. Well, this is one of the largest Cattleya types I've got, and this one's in here as a very reluctant and so far non-bloomer, and I'm determined to get this to bloom. If it's in my Cattleya book, I will look it up and see if there's a tweak or something that I can just do to get this thing to fire off. It's produced a massive root system this year off of the 2 leads. Let's turn it round so we can see what we're looking at. Yeah, so it's taken off in this direction, and following that up, that's this leaf here, and then this one here, following that one up, is this leaf here. So these are the 2 latest growths, and if we look down inside, there's nothing more than a nubbin, and it's done that on every single new growth it's produced, and again in there. So that's what I've got. And if you look on the older growths, when I got the plant, obviously it had bloomed. There's a, you know, a stump there that was obviously a bloom spike. But this new growth's got that same nubbin in it. Yeah? Possibly not. That one did have, but it didn't do anything. So it's a strange plant. And the other reason I've selected this is, if that book says that once the bulbs mature, it needs a bit of a rest, I'm going to struggle to be able to rest it when it's already producing its next 2 new growths. If I try and rest this now, then these 2 new growths will sap the strength of the plant. Now it may be that that's what's supposed to happen, and maybe that would trigger the blooms, but I'm going to look it up and see if I can get a bit more information. But several people have commented on this one and said, you know, including a Cattleya person, that said in the UK, if it's going to bloom, it's going to be around sort of May, June time, so into next year. And being a Laelia, if it's going to have the giant long spikes that a lot of the Laelia have, they're going to take a while to develop. So if it does need some sort of rest after maturing growths, I can risk it. I can give it 3 or 4 weeks with no feed and very little water. These growths by then will be starting to sap into the plant's reserves, but then I can get it going again, if you see what I mean. So, and the other reason this one's on the list is this is going to be the first one in the holy clay pot to have to come out. Because if you look at where the plant is relative to the pot, it's all over one side. It didn't grow where I expected it to. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But nonetheless, given the sheer volume of roots on both of these 2 front leads, these next 2 growths are going to do the same thing, and they'll all be outside of the pot, and it will then fall over. It's already lopsided. You can see it really does lean. When I put it on its shelf, it has to lean against another plant or it tips. So this is the first holy clay pot Cattleya to have to be unpotted, and boy is that going to be fun. There's an awful lot of roots hanging onto that pot and coming out through the holes that may not thread back through. So that's going to be fun. Not yet. I'm going to get my timing geared up to when those new growths start their new roots, so that the damage to the older root system won't be quite so dramatic. So that's Laelia purpurata, and its variety atropurpurea, endearingly known as "Why Won't You Bloom?" well, it's got another bit on the end of that which I can't say on camera. So that's the state of play with that one. It is quite a large plant. I suppose you're looking at 2 feet from the base of the growths to the top of the leaves. I like the plant, don't get me wrong, but I really do want to see it bloom. That variety was specifically chosen. You know, there's lots of Laelia purpuratas with named varieties, and this is the one I wanted. You know, so come on, let's have some blooms, mate. Right, now we're getting somewhere. Typically, this Laelia purpurata pushes up new growths late summer into autumn. Well, yes, it's doing that. Maybe a little late because we're really into winter now, but nonetheless, towards the end of the year, the new growths form. They grow on through the winter and reach maturity in late winter, early spring. And then after a short rest period, the spikes will form. So that's where I've been going wrong there, I think, is the fact that I've just continuously watered and fed this because it's always been growing, or always appeared to be. So when these 2 next growths mature, I may have lost the opportunity on the current new growths because they didn't get a rest in any shape or form, quite honestly. So once these 2 latest new growths are mature, they've reached their full height and everything, we'll cut the feed down and ease the water off, and then look for signs of buds. And if we get some, obviously we can then start feeding and watering again to get the spikes to grow. Otherwise they'll exhaust the pseudobulbs they're growing from. And then, once it's flowered, it has another little rest. Yeah? So these little tweaks may be all it needs, because, you know, it's a strong, healthy plant and it grows well, it just won't bloom. And I did say that some of the species Cattleyas do have some little quirks that without may not bloom and may not grow as well. So that's the longer term plan for this. So we'll be looking for, you know, these new growths to mature and possibly get some spikes early next year. We'll work on it. Somebody did suggest this, and I didn't think about it. I'd thought, no, there's only one person. And then I've just looked at it today, and I think this is going to go on the list. It has potential for interest. This was part of a large plant that really had Fusarium bad. It's been treated several times, and it never responded. It's one of two pieces that I kept. And for a long time, these 2 pseudobulbs just sat, no roots, no growths, nothing. They just sat on the shelf, basically, for probably 6 months or more. And then there were signs of something happening. Last thing it did since this was this. That was the last growth it produced. And if you look at the size it ought to be, obviously it's far from happy. It also decided to grow vertically. I had to plant it like that because of where the roots were at the time, and there really weren't many, so I had to take advantage of that. But this latest growth is an awful lot better and is showing much better signs of recovering, and we do have the start of a new root system. So I'm including this for the simple reason I did say a while back when we looked at this, that as soon as I get a growth with some new roots, the older part of the plant's coming straight off. I'm sacrificing it. And it looks like now's about the time. If you look at the shape of the plant, yeah, the new lead took off in this direction, produced a very, very small growth and some roots that are far from happy roots, but now it's starting some new ones with a better new growth. So I'm probably just going to take that off and start that again, probably on a mount. And but as a plant that's been recovering for over 2 years, it now has a point of interest. So it might be worth keeping that one on the list and following its progress. By separating off, it could die. But I think with a new root system starting, it's a bit too early yet. I want to see a few more roots than that. But we'll see how we go. The only reason I've struggled with this is the blooms. and the fact that I would probably never be able to get anything like it again. So we'll run with that. I think I'll keep that on the list. It's just a Cattleya no ID hybrid, but when you look at the blooms, there are quite a few species reasonably close to those blooms. It's not far off a species. It is a hybrid, or it could be a primary cross and an alba form. There's so many combinations of what it could be, I will never know what it really is. All I know is that it does have spectacular blooms if we ever see them again. So yeah, I'll put that on the list as an interesting thing to try and get going. And we'll see how we progress with that. Now, this is Tolumnia urophylla. It's my only Tolumnia species. And it does have some species traits that, as far as the hybrids are concerned, a lot of the traits of the species have been bred out of the hybrids. And as a species, the blooms are smaller, they're still attractive, but the trait with this one is the ridiculous length of the spikes. They can be heading up towards 3 feet long, which is a lot of spike for such a small plant. But nonetheless, it's a reliable bloomer. This actually got a culture award at Malvern a few years ago. I've actually had this particular Tolumnia quite a long time. And it's reluctant to drop any old leaves or fans. So it sort of remains intact, this one, which makes it quite difficult to work out which are the new growths and which are the older growths, because they all look incredibly similar. But it's a nice healthy plant. It's got an extensive root system. It's even heading off around the back of the mount now. Some aerial roots, many roots attached. The tie that holds it in place could easily come off now, and it's firmly attached. So what we'll be looking for on this one down the line is its next spike, and that'll be fun to see just how long it takes from when we first spot it to actually opening the blooms. It is quite a long time. But normally a summer bloomer, so I doubt if there'll be any spikes for a while now. That's probably the best new growth to watch, is the one right round the back there up against the bark, because it is shiny new. It's only just starting. So we can watch the progress of that new growth specifically and look out for a spike somewhere down the line and see what we get. But it's a nice plant. I'm pleased with this one. It survived the almighty scale attack that hit all of my Tolumnias quite bad a while back. It survived that. In fact, it survived it quite well. So when I unmounted the Tolumnias, discarded those that had just gone too far, this one was not in a bad way at all. It still had pretty good roots, and it took off on its remounting very quickly, and it re-established itself fast. So it's a nice Tolumnia to grow. As I say, blooms are a little smaller than some others, but that's urophylla. And the other Tolumnia that I've included on the tag, its only identity, it is a hybrid, is moohfor. So that's what it will be known as, moohfor. But it is basically a hybrid. I doubt if that's its registered name, highly unlikely. And I've chosen this one as it's a brand new acquisition. It hasn't got any active roots. It's got one large fan and a new growth starting, and that new growth has a spike. So everything on this is starting from scratch, if you see what we mean. So we can follow the progress. In the not too distant future, I'd expect that new growth to produce a root system. The root system is not good, but it's enough to keep the plant hydrated. As I've said before with Tolumnias, what looks like dead roots often still function, even though they look brown and a bit shriveled. They still seem to get the hydration into the plant. So we're starting, this is probably a piece taken off of a larger plant, possibly, I don't know. But one single older fan that didn't bloom, Yes, it did. There's the base of the spike down in there, if you can just see it. Looks like a little fawny coloured circle. That's where the spike on that older fan was cut off. Yeah. Now it has a new growth with a spike just starting. You can just, I need another hand here. You can just see it here. Okay. So a new growth, new spike, and no active roots growing at the moment. So that'll be interesting to watch, that one. Okay, so that's the Cattleyas and Tolumnias section, and those will stick together in subsequent progress videos. There's some interesting choices in there. You know, there's a rescue, there's some brand new plants, you know, there's some non-bloomers. It's a good variety in there, and I hope it represents the particular set of plants. I mean, obviously I don't want all the Tolumnias included, but I've picked on two diverse ones, and with the Cattleyas we've got a rescue in there, we've got a non-bloomer, so hopefully it makes for an interesting set and future progress reports. Well, thanks for dropping by, and see you next time.